This meeting is being recorded.
Okay. Right, well, we're going to make a start. This is Black History Conversations. We're delighted that we're welcoming Kate Simpson, who's from the University of Sheffield and the David Livingstone Centre. So she's going to be talking with us in a little while as she's writing about a book on Livingstone's expeditions. Now, what we're going to do today for our session is we're going to start off with Kate's talk, and then we'll catch up with the other things that go on, and I will do the recognition of country, which acknowledgement of country, because I'm here in Australia. I'm Liz Millman from Learning Links International, and I'm joined by some really good colleagues here. Excellent. Okay then, so Kate, I think we're going to go over to you straight away.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for having me here. It's an honour to get the opportunity to talk about my research, and yeah, thank you very much for taking the time on a Friday afternoon. So my talk is basically called Where Are the Women? And just one final test, you've been able to see my slide change, yeah?
Yeah, perfect.
Fantastic. So in Tet, village on the Zambezi in February 1859, in a local dialect, some old blind women sing the Lord's Prayer and the Jesuit Creed. Now, David Livingstone, who was a missionary and traveller, alongside two Portuguese men, happens to hear these women and listens and writes down the songs that the women sung. The women's families had sung the prayers, which they had learnt from Jesuit missionaries for over 100 years. It's a really beautiful, rich vignette of a story about history and religious worship, culture and art history. It's a story, though, that we never hear. In fact, we only know about it because David Livingstone writes to his friend, Dr. Bleak, and says, remembering the difficulty of getting ladies who had always sung them to speak slowly, you must reward us by placing the documents in some little nook of the library. The thing is, stories about African women in the 19th century are often like this, hidden, partial, an aside in someone else's story, or something that someone makes a record of and puts away for their own interest. I'm proposing in my research to try and do something to assuage that somewhat, to use texts and objects together to try and bring some of these people back in some way if we can. Almost like a critical fabulation of, almost like a version of Hartman's critical fabulation. She talks about how we can use a little bit of hard research and some scattered facts and have a focus on no detail being too small or unimportant to include. We can bring these things together to tell the stories of people who have a tendency to be also rans in the historical record. So in this talk, I'm going to focus on two objects and hopefully the women that we've begun to find behind them, and see how far we can go in evidencing the unarticulated narratives of African women who encountered expeditions such as David Livingstone. I'm going to look at two items that he acquired in 1859 during his second Zambezi expedition, which was between 1858 and 1864. Now, there's a really specific thing about why I've taken 1 year, and it's to stop me doing what often happens in history, which is, people go for information which is easiest to access or which there's most of. So what I'm doing is, it's called slow digital critical practice, where a really narrow focus forces me to engage with everything that I might be able to find, that again, there is no detail too small, there is no kind of corner of information which I haven't searched. Bringing together lots of tiny little bits of information and trying to layer, almost like a palimpsest, the information about colonially collected objects to locate them physically in the space they inhabit now, the space they inhabited previously, and the spaces they have inhabited along the way, and narratively in the spaces they create. The stories told about these objects, or the stories told about how these objects came to our knowledge. Basically, I'm taking imperially inscribed artifacts and trying to bring them nearer to their original owner or creator, the unnamed woman, and to re-establish her identity in the histories that we tell. 1859 is a really important year because it's the year that Livingstone's personal ideas about colonialism came to the fore. And for some reason, it's the year he intricately links it to his understanding of what would end the trade in enslaved people. And it's something that people don't often talk about with Livingstone. So he proposed government-sponsored emigration from the UK and the creation of a new colony somewhere in the Zambezi Valley. Primary to supporting this was acquisition as evidence. He took objects which by possession then become British artifacts and thus imperially claimed. He picked them to prove for the people who were at the imperial metropole what could be gained by colonization of the Zambezi and its tributes. He writes repeatedly during 1859 a variation of, I quote, "I become more convinced every day that English colonization will become the route out of slavery," end quote. So he was always looking to try and provide some kind of value in the area. Which is why, kind of in part, I want to take these British artifacts, a lip ring that belonged to a Manjanga woman and a bracelet that came from a woman in the Zambian Kafu Valley, and see how they can be renegotiated to tell individualized African-centric stories, stories that for once don't focus on the European interloper. I don't wish to ventriloquize Central and Southern African history. I'm very aware I'm a white post-colonial female researcher and I'm a European museum professional. I'm aware that I have to situate myself and my scholarship, and that I absolutely do not assume or presume to know the site of the intercultural encounter from the side of the oppressed. I'm not Zambian, Malawian, or Zimbabwean, and will never be able to experience that power dichotomy that comes from being on the side of the colonized. My work engages with things that have become like British artifacts. And I really want to explore the opposing representations of that sociocultural moment in European exploration history, and to evidence that just a little bit of a concerted effort by those that bear the weight of responsibility can bring back the narratives of artifacts stolen by my ancestors, held in galleries and museums in my country, and collected to reify my nation's imperial history. And in doing this research, I actively acknowledge the subjugation of countless African caravan workers, cooks, stokers, assistants, and porters, upon whose backs such explorations are made. Now, it's a contemporary form of history I'm doing. It's one that's based on the digital library, the digital archive, being able to find digital images, online catalogues, the amount of metadata and little snippets of information that you can find out about objects nowadays. These things are kind of technologies of recovery. So we can kind of extend this process of representation or re-understanding of what we see when we go into these museum environments that are supposedly sharing information with us. So I think if you read texts and objects digitally against the grain of the traditional repository, it becomes possible to uncover the appropriations of local knowledge, the interactive processes of intellectual production, and other kind of knowledge and material-based contributions that are essentially embedded in these objects. Radical new ideas take a really long time to develop, and I acknowledge, as many people do, it doesn't matter how much or how advanced the technology is, we have already lost much of the object and human information forever. But to me, that is the reason to do the research. The anecdote, the unmarked bracelet, the beadwork in a box, the lost word, the sketch, the bowl, oral histories are all part of a vital reimagining and understanding of our past. Don't get me wrong, researchers have made really great strides in showing how engaged and complex European and Southern and Central African working relationships on expeditions of supposed exploration were. But it's still, in 2023, noticeable that critical thinkers are rarely talking about women or their roles in these journeys. It's sometimes almost possible to believe, with some of the 19th century Western narratives that we read, that these people never met a single woman. So limited are their mention. When Southern and Central African women are mentioned in European accounts, the women often appear as ethnographic specimens, mute and immobile. It has taken considerable effort and cropping on my part for every picture of the women that are on this presentation to not be showing their breasts. There are it's a very, very fixed gaze you see of women in this area, which is, hugely de-individualizing, I think, when we come to engage with these sources contemporaneously. And as you will see from pretty much all my photographs, none of the women are ever named. In April 1859, when he was in the Shere Valley, where the Manjanga people lived, is one of the many manuscripts, texts, diary entries, letters, notes of Livingstone from that year that others and make strange a lip ring. And kind of because he goes on about it so much, kind of by consequence, he makes the women who wear them strange. He writes, the women perforate the upper lip close to the nose and enlarge the orifice till they can insert a ring of ivory or tin, of which from 1 to 2 inches in diameter. Some ladies of fashion have upper lips so drawn out as to admit which with the outer edge of the lip hangs below the chin and the mouth and underlip appear through the upper. Livingstone writes that, but he writes it consistently. He's writing it in letters to his friends. It's published in his books. What he's doing, what many European male writers of the time and female were doing, was kind of mapping these women's bodies as sites of otherness, preconceived notions of exotic or orientalized behaviors and representations. And it's very weird. His fascination, is very strange. Which is probably why we have this in the museum, David Livingstone Museum in Blantyre in Scotland. When someone first encounters this particular Manjanga lip ring physically in contemporary Scotland, their only contextual information is the museum catalogue ID, someone's written Agnes on it, in ink, and likewise a similar hand or the same hand has written Manjanga lady's lip ring, May 1859. Did a woman take it out of her mouth to give or sell? Was it taken from her? Was it made as a souvenir of passing trade? All you can say when you first look at it is that in this lip ring is, sorry, I've got 2 screens, I'm talking to my slides. In this lip ring is like a narrative of acts that will never recover. Matthew Battles said that a collected object is a kind of vessel freighted with a irredeemable record of acts and things, inaccessible worlds of sense and events, a tissue of phenomenal dark matter caught up in time's obliterative machinery. It's quite a long quote, but I think it's true. They are spectral presences in many of these things we have in museums that people often ignore. Because essentially, without context, this lip ring is other. It's linked faintly to a woman in the Shere Valley, but claimed by the daughter of a British traveller. It primarily reflects the gaze and physical space of the European interloper. And for many years, until recently, it sat in a museum storeroom. It's essentially a relic of a different spatial understanding and an artifact in someone else's story. When you think about the narrative mutations belongings go through when they are taken from their original wearer or owner, and they are displayed in colonial museums or imperial museums, Matanga, Chibata, and Nyathi emphasize that, quote, the naming of the objects, which mostly acknowledge a tribe or region, denied and erased the local authorship and ownership by the original owners, users, and custodians of the object. Now, while I might not be able to uncover the person behind the lip ring, it is being able to use the digital tools that are available to me as technologies of recovery that enable me to search across multiple sources using the information I can take from the lip ring, the names and the dates, to find out that it's highly likely this lip ring sent back to the UK in a parcel by Livingstone, sent via one of the members of the Zambezi expedition, And he writes about it in a letter written by the Kongom, which is a distributary of the Zambezi, to his daughter on the 28th of February 1860. My dear Nanny, I send this home by Mr. Ray, our engineer, whom probably you may see. I send at the same time a box with a few objects of natural history for Robert and Thomas, his sons, and a few rings for you. One is a lip ring, and if you like to wear it as the woman up the Shire do, Mr. Ray will show you how. I bought it, and the woman took it out of a hole in her lip and gave it. Very sorry, I thought, to part with a thing that made her so braw. Braw being a Scottish word which means beautiful or pretty. It's that comment, and the lip ring is what started me on this research that drives me mad. He's aware that the original owner didn't particularly want to give up her personal jewelry that's physically in her body. I mean, that concept is just so horrific and so violent. And it's an argument, I think, that's even more strongly kind of made aware when, in his book that's published, he writes, the women appear to have very large lip rings. I bought an ivory one, which in size and shape was exactly like the rings for putting table napkins in. The poor have bits of reed or calabash only. The lady was loth to part with it, but the sight of cloth prevailed. So in his published record, he's actually writing an even more pressurized story of acquisition. In this instance, there is no way to account for or see that Livingstone disassociates from his actions in that he coerces a woman to remove an object from her body for a reason it's kind of hard to fathom other than just the act of acquisition itself. An object that even he identifies as being of high value to the woman. We can infer something of the woman's status by the fact that it is ivory and not reed or gold. But we take the sources in a palimpsestic way, a story from one, a date from another, an object from a third, searching other sources to establish if there's further information available, and ultimately trying to situate the lived experience of the encounter. Because I think if we can do that, if we can bring together these little bits of facts, we start to bring back some of the emotional lived experience that are behind these objects. In this instance, it's like unique personal adornment, coercive pressure, dismissive colonial arrogance, aggressive fiscal incentivization. Like, these are all things behind that mute, small object that sits in a museum collection. When Livingstone, and this is the mad thing about the lip ring, when Livingstone sends his daughter the lip ring, it becomes a gift from a parent to a child, a memento of the father's journey far away from home. And another 53 years later, its status changes again. It becomes a public sign of otherness. It was displayed in 1913 in an exhibition at the Royal Scottish Museum in Edinburgh, which went on to become National Museum of Scotland, to commemorate the centenary of the birth of Livingstone. The lip ring, along with other objects, was loaned by Agnes, who he called Nanny in the letters, son to the Royal Scottish Museum for the exhibition. A catalogue published in conjunction with the exhibition helps us see that the lip ring is offered as part of a presentation of the, quote, vivid picture of Livingstone. The exhibition catalogue shows these British authors' ideas about the African continent at the time. They thank Captain Livingstone Bruce for the privilege of showing these objects to the public for the first time, so that by geographical and ethnographic means the passage of India from a regime of superstition and barbarism to Africa where life is safe and natural resources of field and forest are cultivated and exchanged is made visible. It's, yeah, what I've already said, the emphasis of the British on the British traveller and the objects he collected as artefacts or specimens of distant places and people previously characterised as dangerous and uncultivated before British intervention. The catalogue doesn't show us how the lip ring was displayed. However, you can see from my slightly out of focus taken with my phone picture that it lists information just above the lip ring about a drawing. I think it's one of these two drawings. And also the bracelet, which I'll talk about in a second, it's all brought together. It's placing these things in close relation to each other and suggesting that the actual objects probably were near to each other on view in the exhibition. The catalogue describes the illustrations as drawing of native women showing lip ring inscribed by Livingstone for Agnes and tell her that she must come out and get her lip bored for the beautiful ornament. The exhibition catalogues a really kind of good way of showing us how we can connect the fragments of information about sources and how each kind of points to some kind of detail, some bit of information, a bit of knowledge about the lip ring and Livingstone, and at least two women who may or may not have called it their own. I think we can work to situate individuals in cross-cultural encounters and personal in an emotive space, and I think there's nothing wrong with that. We should be cataloguing, labelling and displaying individuals' belongings as belongings, because I cannot reiterate how important the understanding of the lived experience of people involved in these events as a way to kind of give back a tiny bit of agency to all those who are embedded in whatever the object is and its history, as a way to claim a moment in time and space and take it away somewhat from that focus on the European interloper. But even as I say that, I mean, I don't have time to even engage with what the lip ring meant for Agnes as its imperial owner and as a daughter of their European colonial acquirer, to her understanding of what the objects were, where they came from. Did she think about who they came from? Did she think about who owned them? Did she acknowledge the gendered history of the objects that she had been given? It's certainly a question that needs much further research and for which we don't have time to discuss today. But what's even more weird is that not all women are so totally mute in the European record. Some representations of women have always been there, but even though they're written, they remain unseen. Manenko was a female Linda chief. She was critical in facilitating Livingstone's journey on the Zambezi. He said, "My men succumbed to this petticoat government sooner than I did so. Leaving me no power and being unwilling to encounter her tongue, I was moving off to the canoes. But she gave me a kind explanation, and with her hand on my shoulder, put on a motherly look, saying, 'Now, my little man, just do as the rest have done.'" So if Livingstone could note the individuality of African women, how are we still ignoring that kind of lived, visible presence and sometimes recorded experience of these women? And why are we not doing more to reestablish the individual in our representations? I suggest that part of the problem is this still explicit divide we have between object and person. But when something is colonially acquired, the poetics of the objects change. The object doesn't reflect its original purpose, in this instance, personal adornment, but instead it really loudly supports the roots of colonialism and that difference in pseudo-cultural hierarchies justify imperialism. The women who are behind these objects show me that the people whose experiences we're trying to find fall into two categories. There are women who have a strong archival memorial weight. They tend to be able to own their name. They are able to act in the world and they are recognized. And there are women with an archival memorial weightlessness, the phantoms. Their being and agency is totally kind of taken out of records and written narratives, but it's still there. They are phantoms. They are detectable enough to identify them as individuals in the world. And often that does start with just a connection to a specific geographical location. But they are ancestors in these objects' history and separate or separated from the labels we've given these objects. The acknowledgement of their more difficult to discern position is not to suggest that women are not findable. People like myself in positions of privilege with overt levels of access to resources, archives, collections, digital capabilities really have to start taking more advantage of our position and access to do more to disrupt these structures. I seek to contribute to this reckoning of what we do and its ties to imperialism. And instead, let's start having more complicated, entangled histories. The African women I gesture to are really hard to find when it comes to identifying owners and wearers. The bracelet from Kafu Valley I'm still working on it. It's an even harder story than the lip ring. It's a relatively ununique design. It's difficult to locate. I know the item was given to the museum, but I don't know who. I only know the date that Livingstone came by it and the region it came from. Livingstone wrote to a professor of geography at the University of Cambridge in 1859, and he said, I quote, "All this ostensible machinery has for its ostensible end," and then he went on to talk about colonialism, but these are the machinations of imperialism that have kind of come into our collections, which we don't actively acknowledge. They weren't brought together to tell the story of multiple cultures, of all the people who inhabited the Zambezi Valley, but they're there to show otherness. Whilst there's no homecoming for the lip ring and bracelet, it's likely we'll never find the names. I hope I have been able to show that there are tangible tendrils of ownership there. There are people. It's not we don't know anything about these items. I strongly believe that up until this point, it's just we haven't been willing to do the work which digital tools now support us to do. We can encourage disruptive and counter-consensual readings of that intercultural encounter in stories and travels. We can access collections, archives, and databases that previously would have been out with our geographical and financial reach. We can do things that traditionally would have been really resource-intensive research, and we can share our work much more openly. Arturo Schomburg famously said, colonization of history accompanies colonization and slavery. So surely the barriers to properly understanding that gendered and grievous history of colonization, imperial domination, and its enduring physical embodiment starts by disassembling those notions of history. Although forever changed as a consequence of acquisition by the European interloper, the jewellery continues to contain a constellation of meanings. In 1872, Livingstone met a young girl who had become separated from her mum when slavers had captured her mum. And he gives the little girl food. There's like a page and a half in a really small notebook about this little girl. And then she disappears. Don't know anything else about her. And Livingstone writes in his diary that some of the people were annoyed they didn't have much food and he'd given her food. And he wrote, she's somebody's bairn nevertheless, which means that she's somebody's child. And that sticks with me. We have a duty, a responsibility to tell as much of the story of these unnamed people as possible. But also that story of those blind old women singing and that depth of history and kind of what happened there, that story is going to haunt me for a very long time. The richness of the narratives that we've already lost and the work that we still need to do now. But yeah, thank you very much for your time. That's kind of currently where my research is at the moment. Book forthcoming next year.
Right. Well, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you. Wow. Now we've got several other folks joining us, which is really good. Welcome, Lindy, and welcome, Cordelia. So thank you so much. And so this is going to all come together in your book you're writing. And so we hope that you'll come back and share that with us. So now, what about any questions or additional points to pose to Kate? Anybody with any bright ideas? You really rattled through such a lot of stuff there, really, and it's fascinating. And with the museums as well, and showing, for all my life, museums have just been there with things that you just sort of wonder why on earth they're there and why aren't they back at home. Okay, so I think Garrick was first, if you forgive me, June Elizabeth.
Just a couple of questions, Kate, on the research for your book. Have you been able to go back to any of the location along the Zambezi River and talk to any women that are able to sort of tell you the story going back 100 years or so, whether that oral history is contained and can be sort of confirmed?
Yeah, not myself personally, but we had colleagues paid for them to do research with oral histories, and I just got funding, and five folk are coming from five different countries along the Zambezi area are coming to Scotland next year. So we got funding for them to come across and to basically look at everything in the collection and decide if there's anything they want or they don't want, not only history-wise, but there are certain trades and artistry that there was one, it wasn't a woman actually, it was a guy who said, I recognize that pattern. I couldn't do it. My dad didn't. He said, but my granddad did. So if you give me that, I can take it apart and I can remake it. So hoping that this is the start of giving stuff back to where it's meant to be, but also importantly, doing this as obviously my book's my book, but the project that I've just put in funding for is a bigger thing for us to work together to find out more. And David Livingstone's not that long ago. There are some people in the villages on the videos whose like grandparents remember. Old people whose grandparents remember. So we are so close to losing that last link. Grandparents who remember these massive parties coming down the river.
Yeah.
Up the river.
Amazing. Garrick, is there anything else you wanted to add? No? Okay.
No, that's fine. But I was thinking also that although you're focusing on women, I'm just wondering the role that any of the the local chief would have been able to participate in the project and maybe to add and verify a number of things, because they normally would keep the traditions in that village, and so they will know the stories.
Yeah, we're going to try. We've got some really good contacts who are doing the work, so it's not me doing it, paying for me to go over there, when actually the cost of that is equivalent to 5 researchers for a week being able to travel, particularly to the more remote communities, and talk with the chiefs. Some of that research has actually just been done, so we should hopefully be able to, once we've got the transcriptions, some of the stuff that's coming from Zambia is still being translated at the moment. So we've got the videos.
Okay.
Wow, it's fantastic. June Elizabeth, you had a question.
Thank you very much. It was a very nice presentation, and I liked how you focused on that specifics. And I was going to ask similar to Garrick, but I know you explained why you chose that that method of presenting, and why you chose to just keep it contained. And I think in doing that, you really maximize the presentation, because you've got so many things in it, because it was like a hybrid with the material evidence and the presentation of research, which come together. And I found it, like I guess we all did, very, very informative. And having the pictures, because sometimes you don't have pictures of objects from a museum, I found that very useful to stay on track, because it can be a bit transference. You've got to protect yourself, but you know, as to know some of the things that they endured, the women, you know. But that's part of being a historian, getting it out and presenting it the way that you did. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I do not want to be another exploiter. So yeah, trying to find ways to, because I'm a very visual person. Too many words, you know, it just is too much. So yeah, trying to find images that were as respectful as one could be. Yeah, but there are some things that equipment used for enslaved people that I will never be able to show or engage with, because that's deeply cruel and unfair.
Yes, there's so many issues. It's such a sensitive field to work in, and I really appreciated the way you were able to explain and talk that through, and evidence that approach in your presentation. Lindy, it's good that you've been able to join us. Lindy, have you got anything you wanted to mention to Kate? I'm sorry you had difficulty getting in. I can't hear you, Lindy. Oh dear. You switched on, but I can't hear you. Yeah. Or unplug your earphones.
Yes, you're quite right.
Ah,
Yes. I knew I'd done something with my headphones last time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
No, all I've just picked up in the last few minutes, and I do apologise to Kate for having missed her talk. The gremlins seem to be at work on the system. I don't know why. The last 5 minutes or so that I've heard is to make me want to go back straight away and listen to the entire presentation before I can actually ask any useful questions or make any useful comments. So if it was very visual, then I think that will be great, and as you say, a great help to remembering things rather than a lot of words, which I'm not always sure work so well on sort of oral talks.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Lindy. And you'll be able to see the recording, I think, early next week. And we were joined as well by Cordelia. Cordelia, I don't know if you're there. Can you hear me? Anything you might want to add? Point out?
I find these. This is my second meeting, so I find it quite fascinating, actually. So thank you, Dr. Simpson, for your presentation. I enjoyed it thoroughly, as I did the first meeting. I haven't got any questions. I just look forward to getting recording, because I did miss some of the talk, so I'd like to catch up on what it is that I missed. But I thought it was a brilliant presentation, so thank you for the insight.
cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kate, were you going to respond at all?
I just said, cool, thank you.
All right. Well, it's just absolutely brilliant, and it's so good. So I don't know if you want to hang on with us a little bit longer. We'll just tell you a little bit about what we've been doing in the last few weeks, share with other people, and then any other points anybody wants to come up with will be great. So if that's okay, folks, I'm going to share my screen. But before I do that, I'm going to thank you again very much indeed, Kate. Absolutely fascinating work, and something that you clearly so passionately care about. And you know, you're able to share so well. You know, very important and specific, very specific area of research, which will have knock-on effects for a lot of other things. And we're our organisation's doing a research project with the communities in Jamaica, and I was listening as you were saying about what you were doing. I was thinking, oh yes, there's a lot that we can learn and share. So thank you so much. That was just brilliant. Thank you. Right, so back to just go through this again. So Daisy, let's get that lined up. So I was fascinated as well as an organisation, Women Also Know History. Do you want to tell us about that, Kate?
Yeah, brilliant. Someone pointed out that every time there's a historical issue, they always get a talking head on, and that talking head is usually older and male and predominantly white. That has changed more in recent years, but Women Also Know History is essentially like a data bank of women that know about history from a specific period. And the idea is that you can't use the excuse that there is not a woman who knows about that, particularly finding someone who's a specialist in the field in the country that you're talking about can be dead hard. So that's where, when I was talking about Jabata earlier, like she's in Zambia, so her understanding of that history matters so much more. So yeah, Women Also Know History, a database of women who also know history, which is publicly accessible and searchable.
Brilliant. Well, I was intrigued to find that, so I added that to the thing. So I'm in Australia at the moment, and what's tradition here or normal here or expected here at the beginning of any meeting, so a little bit late on with this, but is an acknowledgement of the traditional owners on the land which the event is happening, where I'm currently living. So this, in my case, is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, their elders past, present and future, remembering that this land belongs to the sovereign people of the First Nations and was never ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So at the beginning, normally, of all our presentations, I'm expected, and I want to acknowledge the traditional owners. Then we had conversations about how with Black History Conversations we ought to have some additional acknowledgement. So this acknowledgement, and we'd be interested in hearing any thoughts or comments that you might have, Kate, or other guests, because we're amending this all the time to try and get something that just is really fit for purpose. So we acknowledge the injustice of the actions taken by the British and other European countries that invaded and took possession of the islands in the Caribbean Sea, as well as the continents of North and South America. In addition, we also recognise the exploitation of the great continents of Africa, Asia, Australia, and many other parts of the world in the centuries of colonisation and ongoing exploitation. And we acknowledge that this has resulted in the destruction and destabilisation of so many nations, peoples and cultures. So at that point, I'm just going to stop sharing and see if anybody's got any comment about that acknowledgement. Obviously, it's not something that's traditionally done in other parts of the world, and the Australian acknowledgement is specific to Australia.
Does the spiel acknowledge the ongoing trauma caused by? I can't remember what the second paragraph was, but something that highlighted the ongoing trauma that is suffered by people as a result of that colonisation, I think would be really good.
I'm writing this down.
I think there's an expression that speak about intergenerational trauma.
Yeah, they call it generational.
We often have that conversation. I don't know if the word is actually written that way, but yes, absolutely right.
Intergenerational, right? I'll have a fix around for the next time that we consult on this. Thank you very much indeed. That's really, I think it's quite important, because I mean, this is something that I think we should do. And in Australia, we've had this devastating referendum recently, which the vote was not to give Aboriginal people a voice to the Australian Parliament. I mean, it's just unbelievable. But people are, trying to get their heads around it and think what on earth can be the next steps forward. But on television programs, if you go to a meeting, if you go to any sort of event, the acknowledgement of country is what we can do. But if you're an Aboriginal person, you can do a welcome to country, and that ceremony is done on many occasions. It's usually a smoking ceremony, and is now just acknowledged and recognised as a part of the way that we do things here, which is great. Right, well, we wanted to say happy birthday to Mary Seacole. Now, this information was shared to me by Hilary Robertson Hickling from Jamaica, and I was very grateful. And I know that Vivian Crawford, another of our Jamaican colleagues, is very respectful about the story of Mary Seacole. So yes, it's a remembrance again. And in Jamaica, the Mary Seacole Foundation and also the Nurses Association of Jamaica and the Institute of Jamaica will mark the day with reverence and respect. So special events going on today. So a little bit there about Mary Seacole to bring us up to speed. And then remember that she was author of The Wonderful Adventures of Mrs. Seacole in Many Lands. And I found that nice map there that even shows a little bit cut off at the top, I'm sorry. And then this story of lost to history, that although she died in 1881, it wasn't until nurses from the Caribbean visited her grave in northwest London. And then local MP, now Lord Clive Soley, promised to raise money for a statue for Mary. And in 2004, Mary was voted the greatest Black Briton. Lord Soley launched the campaign for a statue after leaving the House of Commons, and the statue was finally unveiled in the grounds of St Thomas Hospital on London's South Bank. So I thought that was a nice bit of additional information to share with us as we go through some weeks. June Elizabeth?
Yes, I just wanted to say, I am a member of the Mary Seacole Memorial Association, and we look after her grave. It's not northwest; it's West London, in off the Harrow Road, Kensal Green. And once a year, the first or the second Saturday in May, because of the King's coronation, we had to change the date this year, but that was fine. We have a wreath laying service for her, and
beautiful.
Yes, and the Lord Soley, he invited the Mary Seacole. You got the Mary Seacole Memorial Association, the Mary Seacole Trust. He invited us to the unveiling of the statue. I was on holiday. I knew before, but Sir Cliff didn't want to change the holiday, but in the end he did. So he had to pay for us to come back early. So I've got pictures of the unveiling by Furella Benjamin, just like how I've got pictures of the Windrush statue, which I was invited to last year by Furella Benjamin. So Mary Seacole is somebody of my heart. And one of the first books I wrote when I was at school was the 4 women, medical women, and I wish I knew about Mary Seacole. I would have included her. So
Right.
I had to put that in.
Really, really good to remember that. So I thought about you especially when this came through, and I thought, yes, I'm sure June Elizabeth had got something to add to that story. Okay, then. So let's see what else we've got here. Last week we had this interesting, fascinating presentation by Kate Phillips, her book now published, Scotland, Jamaica and slavery. And some of the information she shared was amazing and really was very emotional. It really touched some of my colleagues who were with us last week. So that was a fantastic opportunity. What did we do the week before? We were hoping to invite Laura Torelli, and she wasn't able to come at the last minute, but she's promised that she'll come in January. So we're beginning to look that up. But just to say that she's now launched with the Heirs of Enslavement, the organisation that they've developed. There's now, I haven't looked to see, there should be another podcast this week, but this was the first two things. So that's really interesting and something of following through. Then the week before, Dr. Alexander Scott from Liverpool to Lampeter and back talked about his experiences and his work. So that was good. And then just to say that work still progresses on this website. It'll take forever, but we're getting there now, and very grateful to Spanglefish who are helping us with this, and to Jim Thakordin who's provided the funding to enable us to develop a better website. Okay, and then just to say we've got this idea about unlocking Black history. I call them Heroes Awards to start with, but it's really to recognise people who've really been almost pioneers in the world and have worked for years over the exploration of Black history as our shared history. So Vivian Crawford's accepted his nomination, so we'll have to make sure that in December that we start recognising all these folks. I think that was Marika. We brought forward her nomination because she's not feeling too good at the moment, and it seemed an appropriate thing to do. She was really very touched and honoured by that, so that was nice. Okay then, so I don't know if anybody else has got anything else that you want to add at the moment. Okay, well, thanks very much. I'm hoping, Gary, I'm going to try and link with you after this session. I need to catch up with something. So Kate, thank you once again. Thank you very much. And we very much look forward to, as I say, hearing from you again when the book's published, and we can add it to the list of really good books that have been produced, and we've had the honour of authors coming to share with us, so that'll be lovely. So we're chasing up other folks for the new year. Thanks ever so much, Kate. That's brilliant. And thanks to you, Garrick, for being here as ever. June Elizabeth also. Roland, thank you very much for being there, wherever you are. And Cordelia, it's lovely that you'll join us, and Lindy too. So that's really good. So thanks ever so much, everybody. That's great.
Okay.
Thanks a lot then.
Now, Liz. Right. Bye for now. Okay.
Bye for now then.
Thank you, Kate. Bye. Thank you.